Non-alcoholic fatty liver is one of those things, they might not have any idea they have it. Then we find it in their lab work, we reverse it, and I'm like, poof, you just got a decade back. When our bucket is full, our blood sugar is much more likely to be super erratic. And it feels like I need that next hit of caffeine or sugar or whatever to get through the day.
What does coffee do to people's blood sugar?
I can tell when someone has adrenal dysregulation if they spike abnormally to black coffee. She had this paper in her hands and she was like, I don't know what to do. Your hormones are lower than the postmenopausal women that I see. You must just have some kind of genetic deficiency so I can put you on medication that you're going to be on for the rest of your life. And that was the moment I was like, nope, this is not the answer for me.
Hello and welcome back to the Vibrant Wellness Podcast. I'm Dr. Emmie here with my co-pilot, Melissa Gentile. Today, we can't wait to welcome Dr. Megan Lyons. Dr. Lyons is the founder of the Lyons Share, a wellness company that provides personalized health coaching, nutrition guidance, and wellness support to individuals and organizations. She is double board certified as a clinical nutritionist and holistic nutritionist and holds multiple certifications in nutrition and wellness, including a Doctor of Clinical Nutrition and certifications in integrative nutrition, clinical nutrition, plus, if that wasn't enough, an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. Megan is known for her evidence-based, holistic approach to health, focusing on sustainable, personalized strategies to improve energy, weight, mood, and overall well-being. Her deep training into functional medicine and integrative nutrition allows her to help clients get to the root of their issues rather than just masking symptoms. And today we're going to be talking about something that is on everybody's minds as far as current wellness topics, and that's insulin resistance and particularly fatty liver disease. We can't wait to jump into this with Megan. Thank you so much for being here, Megan.
Thank you both. I'm really excited.
So are we. And before we jump into the topic at hand, insulin resistance and your approach to that and fatty liver, I would love to know about how you got into nutrition and wellness. You were in the corporate world, as I just mentioned. You have your MBA from a very prestigious school. So was there a moment, or of course, this is probably a series of events, but can you walk us through how did you transition from the corporate world into private practice nutrition?
Yes, absolutely. I can. There was a moment, but the moment took years to actually transition my career. The short version of the story is I grew up a high achiever, just like popped out of the womb as trying to push myself, always in competition with myself. And I genuinely think that's fun to continuously improve whatever I'm doing. So it worked out really well in things like school or any kind of academic or other endeavor that I was working on, like all good. Then I get to college. And to that point, I had never honestly really considered health. I danced all through my childhood and through high school. But I got to college and I saw this cute guy who was on the track and cross country team. He's now my husband, fast forward 20 plus years later. But at that point, I was just like, what could I do to get his attention? Oh, he likes running. I should start running. So I did. And I very clearly remember the first time I ran a quarter mile, I felt on top of the world. Now, he's probably like, he had gone out for a 10-mile run that day and thought I was totally stupid, but I thought I was like a runner all of a sudden. So as this high achiever, I take it and I keep going and going and going. And you two as health practitioners, I bet you can guess where this is going. I ran myself, my hormones, my everything into the ground. I just took it too far. Exercise is amazing. I love exercise. I still love running to this day. But when you're overdoing exercise, especially cardio, and you're under fueling yourself, as I was getting all my nutrition advice from like Shape Magazine, Self Magazine, Fitness Magazine, all of this stuff. And I was under an extreme amount of stress. As a Harvard undergrad, it was just stressful, even though it was like good stress. So that lasted me like, I would say 2, 3, 4 years, to the point, this is now the moment, and then I'll wrap the story. I walk into a doctor's office and I said, I just don't feel like myself. I don't know what's going on. It's just like I'm mini burnt out. I don't have the energy. My body's not reacting the same. Something's off. And it was really fortunate, honestly, looking back. This is like 2008. So, really fortunate that she tested my hormones because I think that was pretty progressive for a 23-year-old patient to test hormones. But she came back and she had this paper in her hands and she was like, I don't know what to do. Your hormones are lower than the postmenopausal women that I see, sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, etc. You must just have some kind of genetic deficiency so I can put you on medication that you're going to be on for the rest of your life. And that was the moment I was like, nope, this is not the answer for me right now. I know I got myself into this. I know I can get myself out of this. So that started my journey of learning. And then fast forward several years later, I actually ended up post MBA taking the leap and starting the business.
Amazing. And I'm curious, Megan, were there any clues prior to this experience that hormones may have been low? And I'm guessing no. And like you said, you got yourself into this. You knew that this was not your normal. This wasn't something that was suggested to be genetic and lifelong.
Yeah, there were clues looking back. And it
Okay.
sounds, again, to us as practitioners, you're going to be like, this is so obvious. But I truly didn't know. As a 23-year-old young woman, I was like, I just oblivious. So I had lost my period for like a year,
That's
which
what I was
is
wondering.
a very raging signal that something's wrong with your hormones. But I was just like, oh, like I hear this happens to runners. It's fine.
Uh,
So that I had insomnia where I was always a good sleeper, but I was more of that like kind of stage 2 tired but wired adrenal kind of craziness where I didn't feel like I needed any sleep. I felt fine, but I was sleeping only like 3-4 hours a night. So that was a big indicator. I did have like a little bit. Oh, I actually had a stress fracture. So there's that as well. And then I had a little bit of like hair loss, not significant, but that now looking back was like, should have been a raging indicator.
but nothing before college.
No, nothing at all.
Right. Regular periods, felt
Yep.
good. Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Megan, I actually had a very similar story of over-exercising through college. And the same thing happened to me on my labs that we actually repeated the labs because we're like, oh, the lab must have like messed up my sample or something like that. And I've never met anyone that had kind of like everything in that postmenopausal range. And I think I was like 22 years old. So that's a really
Well,
interesting, yeah.
now I know we have so much in common. It tells a lot about a person, fortunately or unfortunately, but
Yeah.
it takes one to know one.
Exactly. I just think that whole concept of like HPA axis dysfunction and adrenal burnout, I mean, it's huge now, especially like people abusing caffeine and just not being educated on, these kind of topics. And we're not really taught about cortisol and our stress hormones. We're just kind of like put under all this pressure through college to study and stay up late and perform well.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a cycle.
It totally is. And looking back, I mean, I'm so fortunate for many reasons. One is that I didn't do long term damage, that
Yeah.
luckily at 23, my body was so resilient. As soon as I gave it the tools to heal, it was willing to and able to heal itself. But then also, of course, grateful that I had that experience so that now my antenna is like super sensitive to adrenal dysfunction. I can kind of see it when a client walks into my office. I'm like, okay, I've been there. I can see some of those signs. I know what to do. So it really is a hardship or a lesson that turned into a blessing.
How long did that healing process take? I know
Well,
it's usually a quick one.
yeah. I mean, I think given the tools that I have now, I know I could have done it quicker. And also, I'll say I was I don't know if resistant to change is the right word or just not ready to dive in with both feet. If you told me, oh, you can totally heal yourself by just taking 3 months off of work and no exercise at all and like gain 20 pounds, I would be like, oh, no, thank you. That's not for me. So I took the more gradual approach. And I think to get fully back to where all my levels were normal, I felt normal, all of that, it was honestly like 2 years. So I don't want that to be discouraging to other practitioners or even patients listening. But like you said, Melissa, it is a slow process. And however much willingness the person has to make some change, I think it can speed it up. But you know what? It is what it is. It worked in the right time. And, I'm grateful for that.
Right. And, those types of scenarios, they don't happen overnight. You didn't get to that point
Right.
overnight. So we can't heal overnight either.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
And at this point, Megan, were you working in the corporate world while you were learning about your own health and maybe wanting to
Yeah.
transition out of the corporate career?
Yeah, I was. So I did a 3-year stint after my undergrad in management consulting, which for those listeners who know management consulting, as a newbie in management consulting, I was literally traveling Monday through Thursday, 48 weeks a year. So in a hotel room, eating airport hotel food, all of that, working 80 hours a week, like really grueling lifestyle, which certainly did not help everything that I was putting myself through. And then the MBA and the Institute for Integrative Nutrition was like a little 2-year nice break. But then I went back to management consulting for a year and a half after that. So it was throughout that MBA period and post MBA that I was really working on doing the healing.
I want to use the word burnout, which I think still has a little bit of a stigma, but I believe you've talked about this, and I respect that, and I thank you for that. And I'd love to know a little bit about, even when you started your nutrition practice, it sounds like you were still experiencing burnout. And so I'm wondering at this point now,
Yeah.
how do you wrap your head around, knowing what is best for clients may not be something that we're practicing. So, if maybe we're not practicing what we preach, how do we work around that? And what are your feelings about it now?
That's totally right. I will always believe that our greatest gifts can really quickly borderline into our greatest weaknesses. And that for me, for sure, is my drive. Again, I'm not really competing against anyone else, but I just have something in me that like I always want to do more, do better, whether it's running or business or school or whatever else. And that's amazing. But I know my meter very, very quickly tips into burnout. So it's still something that I continuously stay aware of. And now I have a lot more practices to help buffer me. But even when I first started my business, I had 0 clients on the first day that I started my business. And in fact, I had 0 clients for like 6 weeks or something like that. But that might have been one of my most burned out periods because I was just like spinning my wheels frantically trying to figure out what to do. And so I know from that experience and others that if left to my own devices, I will push myself over to where that meter flips to burnout. And again, now I just have indicators that I help myself not get that far. But like you said, it varies based on the person. My indicators might be totally different, and or my preferences for how many hours I can work or how many hours I can exercise or whatever. It might be totally different from someone else's. So it is a bit of an art to figure all of this out.
Well said. Absolutely. And just getting people in touch with those indicators,
Yes.
especially if they're naturally driven like you
Yes.
or me, we
Yes.
tend to ignore those things. And I'm curious, what are your indicators? If you're kind of just going full force in your career and family and social life, what are some signs that you need to slow down?
I have 3, and they are so clear to me in hindsight, but sometimes in the moment, I forget them. So I literally have them written down to
That's
remind
amazing.
myself. Yeah, it really helps, honestly. So number 1 is I'll start counting things. A very clear giveaway to me is I'll start counting. I'll obsess over, I have 9 clients tomorrow. I have 38 clients this week. I did 159 emails yesterday. It's like weird hook on numbers, that's a sign to me that I'm burned out, because in a way I am telling myself, oh, wow, you're doing a lot, which like fires up my ego. But I know that, like I said, has tripped me over into burnout. Number
Interesting.
two is related, which is I wake up and I feel almost resentful to my clients who are on the schedule and almost like hopeful that someone cancels, which is never where we want to be as practitioners. I see both of you kind of like smiling, like it's not something I'm proud to admit, but if I get to that point, I'm like, something's got to change. I don't have to see this client. I want to see this client. And if I don't wake up with that attitude, I know that I'm not going to give my best self and my best service to them. And then three for me is more of a classic one that I think would apply to many people, which is I have that abrupt like 2:33 a.m. wake up where my mind is going crazy, crazy, crazy. And it always happens around that time. I know that's a cortisol dysregulation that's just kind of jolting me awake.
That is real, especially, in healthcare in general right now. And I do want to dive into a little bit about blood sugar regulation, because as we know, it's more than just what we eat. Like there's so much
Yes.
more that goes into this now. So just kind of starting at high level, why is blood sugar regulation so important and how does it play a role in our overall health?
Absolutely. Well, we can very smoothly transition this from my stress story, because stress is one of the major players when we're looking at blood sugar regulation. I use the term allostatic load, or some people, I use the term also stress bucket, whatever we want to say. That bucket gets filled up with physical stress, with emotional stress, with nutritional stress, with toxic stress, with like physical toxins or emotional, all of that kind of stuff. And when our bucket is full, our blood sugar is much more likely to be super erratic. And what that feels like, many people listening will relate as practitioners. They're like, oh, that client, that client, that client, or maybe even myself. It feels like I need that next hit of caffeine or sugar or whatever to get through the day. And if not, it's a beeline downwards. I have brain fog, I get hangry, I feel like I need a nap, whatever it is, it's like that 2-hour cycle of always needing that next bump. So it doesn't feel good. It feels like you're on unstable territory because your blood sugar is unstable. But of course, long term, it's even more than just not feeling good. First, people care about, oh, my waistline is not responding the same. Oh, like my skin doesn't look as good. Oh, someone said my blood work numbers are a little off. And then longer term, blood sugar dysregulation is related to everything from, of course, non-alcoholic fatty liver, which we'll talk about more today, all the way to cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, all kinds of chronic stuff.
Yeah, we're now hearing Alzheimer's being called what type 3
Type 3.
diabetes. Yeah,
Yes.
crazy.
Yeah, really interesting. And I everyone will come up with a new term for something to get attention. So some of that makes me roll my eyes. But in this case, I actually think it's so astute to help people recognize what we once thought is Alzheimer's just poof comes out of the blue and like hits you based on your genes changing their minds one day. And now we know that very rarely is that actually the case, that almost always has been a multi-decade buildup, a lot of that having to do with blood sugar dysregulation.
I had as one of my questions on here, how do we approach blood sugar regulation from a nutrition perspective? But honestly, I think we've heard that a lot. I think we all know to eat fat, protein, fiber, a
Yes,
balanced meal. Don't you shouldn't be eating every hour of the day. Don't eat, refined sugars, all that. But I kind of want to ask you, like, when somebody is eating, a pretty balanced diet, maybe they are getting 20, 30 grams of protein, especially with breakfast, and they're getting that kind of throughout the day, and they're eating 3 meals a day, but their blood sugar maybe is still going up and down and all over the place. What are those things? I know we mentioned stress, but what are some of those other things that we take a look at that can try and help those patients or clients?
absolutely. So I will spend most time on exactly what you answered. I will first say I always like to start with just making sure that the story that we believe about our nutrition is actually true. I do have a lot of clients who are like, yeah, I get that 20 grams of protein and I eat a lot of vegetables and whatever. But then we realize the candy jar on their desk is always empty and they're getting bites of their kids' food and things like that. And they are eating extremely healthily overall. But we just sometimes, even me, like I don't always stay aware of every single thing that's being put in my mouth. So nutrition is a big one, but like you said, we all have talked about that. So of course, my next one is going to be stress. I know for me, the very first time I put on a continuous glucose monitor, it was during like the height of the pandemic sometime in 2020. And I went into it super like confident, overconfident, like, yeah, I'm a nutritionist. Totally. My blood sugar is going to be great. And it was great for a lot of the meals that I was eating, but it was not great overall because stress was having an unreasonable impact on my blood sugar. I remember we had in Dallas a like really bad ice storm, and I had told my husband the night before, you don't have to drip the faucets, like it's not going to be that bad. And I wake up and our whole house is frozen. Every pipe in our house is frozen. And I just like had this whole guilt trip and stress moment. Oh my gosh, now we're stuck in the ice storm without water. And my blood sugar, even though I had not eaten a thing, went up to like 175, which is crazy,
Wow.
crazy high. And so things like that helped me realize stress plays a major factor. Now, stress is very closely related to sleep. When I was not sleeping well, even if it was just like honestly one night, my blood sugar to an equivalent meal, literally the exact same meal, would have a maybe 1.5 times rise versus if I had slept appropriately. So, sleep, stress for sure. I also find if someone has that kind of chronic blood sugar elevation where they're really never coming down to baseline, of course, it could be, quote, just insulin resistance, which we could talk about. But also, I find if someone's dealing with a big toxic exposure and their body's chronically trying to fight something off, that could really be a part of it. Sleep apnea, some kind of autoimmune conditions. I mean, the story really goes on and on and on. It's kind of a detective puzzle to uncover.
Wow, I didn't
And
realize that there's so many things that, go into it. Especially, I like how you pointed out if someone's body is trying to protect them or fight against a certain toxin, because that's really not very tangible for most people. If they're looking at a glucose monitor and they're doing all the right things, they're sleeping right, they're hydrating, they're eating well, that can be almost like an invisible like factor here.
Absolutely. I have a client right now. We'll see. The story hasn't ended, so we'll see if I'm right, but he actually has type 1 diabetes, so a little bit different than what we're talking about here, but his blood sugar is abnormally elevated. He also works in the lawn care industry, and so we're literally in the process right now of doing the total tox burden, and I know what's going to come back. I know that's going to be a big part of this picture. So whether someone has type 1 diabetes or not, I think that whole toxic soup that we're all living in can definitely be a big contributor.
what about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? I know we're going to focus on that today and its connection to insulin resistance. What drove you to be interested in looking at this, and how do you approach it?
Yeah, well, when I started this business in 2014, I couldn't order labs at that time. But I would still look at other people's labs and little indicators like ALT and AST, two of
Mhm.
the liver enzymes, I would almost never look at because it was almost never a problem. Like
Mhm.
99% of people's were within normal limits. So it was just one of those things that I didn't really consider. Over the almost 11 years since I started that, I cannot tell you, I mean, probably 40% of my clients right now have elevated liver enzymes who come into me. And that change is extremely abrupt. In 10 or 11 years, that's a really big change. So when I see something like that changing in prevalence, I automatically get interested in it. And now starting to do research on this, what I uncovered was, wow, up to 40% of people living in Western civilizations will get non-alcoholic fatty liver if we continue on this trajectory. Up to 75% of people who are overweight or obese may be diagnosed with non-alcoholic fatty liver. So these are really, really big numbers. And then the second and last part that excites me about this is we can totally do something about it. So I get so fired up when I know that I can help a client literally live longer. That is so amazing to me. And non-alcoholic fatty liver is one of those things they might not have any idea they have it. Then we find it in their lab work, we reverse it, and I'm like, poof, you just got a decade back. I think that is so cool.
It is really amazing. I love this. So you mentioned ALT and AST. What other labs are you looking at? And also, I'm also wondering. I want to hear a case later from you, Megan. But thinking about liver ultrasound, obviously having that come back and showing signs of fatty liver, that can be really a game changer for patients also. But what other labs are you looking at?
Absolutely. So I would say if I had to boil it down to just a few more, fasting insulin is one of my favorite labs ever. I think it's so telling, especially in conjunction with hemoglobin A1C. Fasting glucose, I really don't care that much about anymore. I mean, certainly if it's like 150, that's a problem. But the difference between a 90 and an 85 when we know people have already been awake for 2 hours and maybe they're stressed going to the lab and whatever. I just don't get too much into the weeds about fasting glucose.
Right.
A1C, though, more looking at a 3-month metric, 3-ish month metric. I like that better. So that's telling me a little bit more about where their blood sugar was or technically how glycated their cells are. And then finally, fasting insulin, I describe it to clients as like, this is how hard your pancreas is having to work to keep your blood sugar at this level. So even if their A1C was somewhat normal, maybe it's creeping up to 5.5 or 5.6, but all of a sudden their insulin is 27. Okay, now we have an issue here. And then I can almost guarantee we check those ALT and AST, and they're probably elevated or borderline elevated. So at least those together can give me a starting picture. Now, if someone has like mild elevations in all of those, I'll say, let's tackle this with all the tools in our toolkit. Let's test again in 3 months and make sure those are reversed. And I feel pretty good. But depending on the levels, I'll tell you about one particular client if you're interested. I will definitely refer to someone else. I can't order ultrasounds myself, but I do think that's a really good option if someone has super high levels or if they're like, I'm not sure I really buy into this fatty liver
Yeah.
idea,
Smart.
then I'll say, let's go get an ultrasound.
It's stratifying risk further and again,
Yes.
further incentivizing taking a closer look to see what's going on.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. I'd love to know your optimal ranges if you have them for fasting insulin and A1C, because there's a little bit of disagreement and some are quite rigid out there.
Yeah, I would say when I give you my ranges, you're probably going to say they're quite rigid, but I'm going to have a caveat to it. So
Yes,
truly,
please.
I would like to see fasting insulin between 3 and 10. Now, that is a very narrow range. I know Vibrant uses under 24.9, and that would be more of a like, okay, here's where I'm not going to panic if it's under 24.9, but optimal, like how I'm grading myself on my own labs, I for sure want that under 10. So I think if I have someone who maybe their fasting insulin is like, I don't know, 13 or something like that, and they have several other things they're working on, I'm probably not even going to really focus on it as I review their labs, but I know that will go down with the interventions that we're taking. If it's someone who, is in the 20s or above, we're going to actually talk about it and have a more serious conversation. And then for A1C, I mean, I would say if I could pick one number, it would be like 4.8 in my mind is like, that's perfect. But, I'm, again, very that's a goal, and that's not something that I hold myself or my clients to. We have to get to that number. So I'm comfortable if it's like 5.5 or below, and as close as we can get to that 4.8, the better. I'm curious to hear what your reactions to that are.
I'm so glad that you said that it's individual and you spoke to upwards of 5.5, which is more of that standard before reaching into pre-diabetes territory. And I'm just curious because I from personal experience clinically, you may see someone just hover at maybe, let's just say 5.5. We threw that
Yep.
out there. Fasting insulin is normal. Let's just throw out like a 4. And you're seeing them consistently over the years. And they're not progressing to prediabetes and diabetes. What are your thoughts with that? I mean, have you seen that?
I definitely have seen that. So I would look beyond the labs. I love labs, and I totally wish that everything we're told in labs, I mean, it would just be easier and maybe
Totally.
more scientific. But I don't think it's like that. So I'll look clinically at the person, not just visibly, although that too, but I'll say, okay, is their nutrition in line? Do we feel like their stress is within a reasonable limit? Are they sleeping? Is their activity normal? Do they feel good? Do they have any kind of indicators, symptom wise, that could say that something is going on under the surface? And if no, honestly, I'm fine. I do think we have variability in that, just like heart rate variability or whatever. I would be totally comfortable with that person. But if they're that person who their numbers are exactly what you just said, and they do have like 30 pounds that they could lose to be healthier, and that's not budging too, I'm like, something else is going on. We just don't see the whole picture yet if their body feels stuck or not optimal.
Sure, fair. Yeah, really do your due diligence, get a solid history, do that assessment, look for areas that could be improved.
Yes.
And again, the toxins is something that I just think is a good reminder for listeners out there because a lot of toxins are endocrine disruptors, and that's
Totally.
possibly going to impact sugar. You mentioned CGMs, and so I can't wait to ask you right now. What's your experience with CGMs? You spoke to your personal experience, but with clients, I think, in my opinion, is that it's a good experience for patients to have and learn about how they react to specific carbohydrates and specific portions. But I'm not a fan of doing it consistently for someone who is non-diabetic. I'm just curious your thoughts. Are there appropriate candidates? Do you like long-term use in non-diabetic clients? How do you approach it?
So I think it will surprise no one who's listened this far that once I started wearing a CGM, I got so hooked. And I got to the point where I tried to over optimize. What I mean by that is, oh my gosh, if I eat this whole jar of peanut butter,
What's
I
going
have
to happen?
zero spike in my continuous glucose monitor. But if I eat a cup of blueberries, like I have a spike. So I went clearly in the wrong direction of overeating things that, I mean, I have no problem with peanut butter. I still eat peanut butter to this day. We could talk about aflatoxins or whatever, but a whole jar is certainly not the answer. And a cup of blueberries, I happen to think, is a very healthy food. I was over optimizing just based on this one metric of the CGM. So I really caution people that's not the way to go. And it took me several cycles, I think, to go from, oh my gosh, this isn't optimal. Now I'm over optimizing with the jar of peanut butter. Now I balance out. I think for people who are on the opposite end of the spectrum, where they're maybe more new or more green to this area of glucose at all, it could be a really interesting tool just to pop one on and see. They might say to me, oh my gosh, you were actually right. If I eat the dessert after dinner, it doesn't impact me as much as if I eat dessert on an empty stomach. So little things like that, they might learn. But I'll be honest and say I probably recommend it to less than 10% of my clients. I think for most people, it's too much data. It's frustrating and confusing. It could lead to that over optimization that I experienced or over paranoia. So I just think
There's
it
more
takes a
stress.
unique person. Yeah,
Yeah.
more stress. Exactly.
Mhm.
I am curious too. Do you discover food sensitivity sometimes with CGMs? Because sometimes I've heard, I personally have never used a CGM. I think I would be a little too, I think I would do what you did and
Yep.
kind of get a little too like, why is it spiking now? Maybe I need more of this, that, and whatever. Um, but I've heard from people they'll eat something that's supposed to be blood sugar balancing, like steak and green beans, and they get a spike. And then they find out that like green beans are what's, like, spiking their blood sugar, which is just doesn't really that's not intuitive.
Yeah. I have seen that before. I think I see it more rarely than I see like the expected spikers. But yes, it's really interesting when it does happen.
I want to circle back, Megan, to non-alcoholic fatty liver and in relationship to insulin resistance, specifically fructose and sweeteners, because this is
Yes.
an interesting topic. I still don't feel that I have a handle on how the body responds to even our natural sugar alternatives, like our monk fruit and our erythritol. Um, Agave is, very misleading for folks out
Yes.
there. So, how do you approach that conversation when you're talking to your clients with
Yeah, I think you're
non-alcoholic
right.
liver?
Well, I think we are right together in that we don't have a handle as a scientific community
Yeah.
on how people respond to this. I have a brother-in-law who's type 1 diabetic, and he eats a banana with no spike, which literally makes
Mm.
0 sense. I don't know how that happens physiologically. I would say him aside, almost everyone that I have seen has some kind of reaction to fruit that is higher on the glycemic index. And I remind people that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Mm.
If I sit here and eat like 10 slices of dried mango, my blood sugar should go up. It shouldn't stay completely stable. So, the natural sugars in fruit, I think we just need to learn how much our body can tolerate and when is appropriate for us to eat them. Like, certainly, I don't know if either of you remember, I'm hooked on there's this guy that got famous for eating 40 bananas a day.
I
Like
haven't heard
that
this.
just it was it was probably 10 years ago. You could probably look him up.
Was
If
this
he had
during, like,
slapped a
the raw food movement? Like, when
it was around that time.
okay,
Yes,
yeah, like, the
exactly.
Rotzell 4 diets, and
Mhm.
I'm sure I definitely have come across a few of these.
Yeah, so if he had slapped a blood sugar monitor on or a CGM, I'm sure that wouldn't have been a pretty picture. I think with fruit, there's just, a sweet spot. It's very nutrient dense, lots of antioxidants, polyphenols, but we want to keep it in moderation. Now, other ones you mentioned, high fructose corn syrup, I haven't seen a single person who reacts well to that. So I think that's pretty clear that we want to keep it in extreme moderation. For me, like monk fruit, allulose, stevia, any of those, I didn't experience any kind of spike. I do think, though, that based on the research that I've seen, which is still emerging, that overconsumption of those can lead to insulin resistance because there is a response. And it will be even cooler when we have a continuous insulin monitor along with a continuous glucose
Mm,
monitor.
yes.
There is a response that's happening there. I just don't think we can measure it well
Mm.
enough. So, do I consume those things? Yes. Do I consume those in excess? No. I try to keep more of my flavors as natural as possible. And then I see in the middle for true artificial sweeteners like acesulfame, potassium, aspartame, things
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. About half the people actually spike to those, and about half the people don't. So, again, I don't have a clear explanation, but I think it has something to do with us not being able to measure the insulin. And when we can, we'll see a clearer picture.
Mm.
Yeah, that's always interested me a lot with stevia and monk fruit and all these 0 calorie, the more natural ones, so, like, not, Splenda or sucralose
Yeah.
or any of those. Because I mean, like I said, I've never worn a monitor, but sometimes when I consume those, or especially if I'm doing them a little bit too much, like maybe too many element packets, or I'm putting stevia in my coffee, I will experience low blood sugar symptoms maybe a
Mm.
little bit after. I'm like, okay, I definitely think that there's an insulin release from like the taste of it, even though it might not be spiking my blood sugar. So that's kind of my theory, but I've never really been able to kind of prove it or see it on a monitor, and that makes me think too is what are you seeing on these monitors with caffeine? Like what does coffee do to people's blood sugar?
Mhm.
I can tell when someone has adrenal dysregulation if
Mhm.
they spike abnormally to black coffee.
Mhm.
So it's a really easy way. If they're already going to wear a CGM, I'm like, cool, we can skip the saliva cortisol test or whatever. We can tell right here how
Yeah.
your adrenals are doing. I honestly find for those people who popped out of the womb chill, they can drink caffeine, most of them. And of course, we don't know just by that if they're fast oxidizers or whatever, but in general, the people who are naturally more calm can drink caffeine on an empty stomach and be fine blood sugar wise. There's a limit, right? So if they drink 8 cups, probably not. But then the people who are more, I don't know, I was going to say crazy, but I won't put myself in that category. The people who are more naturally on the anxious side, we definitely don't do as well with caffeine on an empty stomach, pure black coffee on an empty stomach. So I think we just can learn how to time it well. We can also tell based on our symptoms, like you did with your stevia, Melissa. You can tell, okay, I'm dipping after that. Well, if someone is drinking black coffee in the morning and feeling like they have that anxiety rush and then that crash, that's a pretty good indicator to them. Add some protein or fat to it, or push it until an hour later, or push it until after breakfast, or skip it, or whatever. Symptoms can usually tell us a good story on that.
It's a really good point. Yeah. I definitely experienced that too with the black coffee on an empty stomach. I'm like, I don't think I'm a good fit for for this one here. And you're seeing that with most people, it sounds like.
Yeah, depending on their persona or their archetype, I do.
Hmm. What about
And
there's some coffees out there with mushroom that are supposed to kind of balance out that blood sugar response. We've talked about that a little bit.
Yeah, I do see a better response to those in the more naturally stressed people. However, I haven't been able to parse out because if you look at the caffeine content of those, they're almost all like 50 milligrams of caffeine or less, which is like half of a normal cup of
It's
coffee. So
lower
I don't know
anyway.
if it's the mushrooms or if it's less caffeine or both.
yeah. That's interesting. And what are some symptoms of insulin resistance? We talked a little bit earlier about symptoms of like dysregulated blood sugar, but what about insulin resistance?
It's tricky with insulin resistance and non alcoholic fatty liver because a lot of people will say they have no symptoms at all. Now, if we really probe, it's this common thing that I know all three of us have heard of. Yeah, I just don't feel great. Like I have those last 10 pounds that won't budge. I feel like kind of irritable or maybe a little insomnia, or I feel like I get super sensitive to scents or caffeine or medications or something like that. So we can, if we really clue in, we can get some signs. But most people walking around who have fatty liver or insulin resistance, they have no idea. So I do think that weight loss resistance is really important to pay attention to, and oftentimes that those go hand in hand. If we have other labs, especially in men with low testosterone, I see a very close correlation to high insulin or insulin resistance and low testosterone. And sometimes with women, hormonal variations, more like PCOS, androgenic hormonal expression can be related to insulin resistance. But oftentimes, those women with just kind of like what I call wonky hormones, like everything all over the place, it doesn't necessarily correlate to insulin resistance.
Some complex stuff there. But we haven't touched on exercise yet. And considering your story, Megan, I think we absolutely should, because running is one of those high impact forms of exercise that can really maybe take a toll on our blood sugar response and our stress and etc. Um, so how do you talk to clients about choosing their form of movement? I'll call it. And
Yeah.
I have two questions here, and we can talk about both in whatever order. But I also want to know, what are your thoughts on body composition tests?
Yeah. Oh, very interesting. So with exercise, it goes back to that stress bucket or that allostatic load where our bodies are designed to move. I think zero people's bodies are designed to do as little movement as they possibly can, right? So we need to move during the day. And I think something like walking, dancing, swimming, yoga, it's pretty hard to overdo those for most people. And they're very good for reversing insulin resistance. That zone 2 cardio that's getting super fancy or got super fancy or popular, that's really great for reversing insulin resistance and fatty liver disease. But then when we take it further, it all depends on how full your bucket is. So if someone has very little stress, they're sleeping well, hormones are great, diet's great, they can totally handle higher intensity activity. There are people who, run marathons every month and they're doing great. That's amazing for them. Their bucket was empty before we added in exercise because exercise is a stressor. So for my clients whose bucket is already full with all the other stressors, I say we want to stick more to the lower intensity and then we'll sprinkle in some higher intensity to their craving or their desire. But it's just an overall balancing act. And then your second question was body composition. Do you mean like DEXA scans and that kind of stuff?
Yes, looking at lean mass versus fat.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful for a lot of my female clients who get stuck on the number on the scale and they don't really know. Like our society is so weird. For some reason, people get in their head like 150 is what they have to weigh, or 180 or 130 or 120 or 100 or who knows what. Everyone has their different number. But if they get really stuck on that, and I'm looking at them physically and looking at their labs and their dietary intake and all this stuff, sometimes the DEXA scan is really helpful to be like, you are crushing it. Your body fat is optimal. You have tons of muscle. Who cares if your friend Sally weighs 5 pounds less than you? It's all about body composition. So for that kind of person, very helpful. For people who come to me with more weight to lose, I think honestly, it is 6 and 1, half dozen the other, like helpful if they want to. And then definitely if someone's bordering on too low body weight or even sarcopenia, some of my clients in their 60s, 70s even, I'll definitely encourage that to check bone density and muscle mass to see if we need to focus there.
So helpful to hear the different scenarios, So
Yeah.
thank you for that. I just wanted to hear you say it because, of course, it's a helpful tool, but unfortunately, we're still seeing BMI, used in research and clinical practice, and
I hate
The worst
BMI.
metric. Yeah.
height and weight. Come
I
on, so many
know.
different body types and exercise levels, and
I can't remember the statistic, but it's something like 50% of Olympic athletes are obese on the BMI scale or something like
yes.
that. So that kind of thing, I'm like, we should not be using that tool anymore.
Mm-hmm. I hear you.
And do you typically always recommend some level of resistance training to help with that muscle mass, to help with blood sugar and insulin?
Absolutely. Muscle's our biggest glucose disposal organ. So unless someone, has an actual injury or something like that, I'll for sure recommend resistance training. I think it is better than cardio for a lot of different things. And I also think that low intensity cardio is helpful for a lot of people. But many people are scared by resistance training. So I remind them they can start with body weight. Like that's still resistance training, doing push-ups against a wall for a lot of
Yes.
people, or like sitting in a chair and standing up. That can be a great form of resistance training. You don't have to go all the way to like powerlifting if you don't want. There's a big spectrum in between.
I feel like there's Megan, I don't know if you're seeing this too. I just feel like there's a big trend out there right now where it's like everyone's kind of that there's a whole community that's like so pro resistance training, and there's a whole nother community that's like, it made me bulky, it gave me moon face, it upped my cortisol, I looked like this, and then now all I do is walk and Pilates, and now I'm thin and I have better, blood sugar regulation, all this stuff. So it is kind of like there's always conflicting things out there. And I don't know, it's kind of disheartening to see such a negative connotation with resistance training because it's so healthy for us and it's so
Yes.
important. And it's like your cortisol, wasn't going crazy. You didn't have all this fatigue and, adrenal burnout just from your workouts. Like that's one piece of the puzzle. And maybe you need to tone it down a little bit or go a different approach. But I think people love labeling things, good or bad in our industry here.
I completely agree. Everything goes on a pendulum in health and nutrition. So if we think about like saturated fat, oh my gosh, saturated fat is terrible. And then wow, saturated fat's so amazing. Every single person should be keto and you can eat bacon all day. And the real answer is somewhere in the middle. And I
Yeah.
feel that exact same way for resistance training and cardio and many other things. I really think the answer is to find a balance of some cardio, whether that's walking or otherwise, some resistance training, whether that's lifting heavy weights or body weight, and some kind of restorative flexibility, mobility work, something like that. I don't think there's a fancy equation for like something we've been missing as society this whole time. And I don't think we have to pendulum swing. I usually think the balance is the right answer. In this case, for sure, I do.
We see it
And
with
not just
diets too. Like 10 years ago, it's like all these, people who are just eating fruit all day, like the guy you were just saying how he was 40 bananas a day. And
Yes.
now we have everyone on carnivore. And it's like,
Yep.
it's so
it's
extreme.
It is
swag.
so extreme. And you know what? That's why all the books sell and why we have a 60 plus billion-dollar diet industry and why I'm sure any of the three of us, if we sold out, we would get more popular, more followers on social media or whatever. But I just don't think that there will ever be an answer like that. I think we do it for marketing and I think humans crave variety. I can understand that. The answer that I'm always going to give, which is like, eat more vegetables, drink more water, let's reduce the sugar. That's not sexy. I get it. So we'll constantly be having to combat that. But on a positive note, there's great things that come from people being more aware of this stuff, even if it comes with some fads or some fringy things.
So well said. And Megan, we're coming up on the hour, but I want to know, and again, you just spoke to the fact that there's no one size fits all. But what are your thoughts on weight training before breakfast? So fasted weight training, just overall, generally speaking.
Yeah, I definitely think it depends on the person. I think that a fasted light walk is a good idea for many people. Like I wake up, I do my 20-minute sunshine in my eyes walk. Unless we're in an extreme state of adrenal dysfunction, I don't think that's harmful for almost anyone. Weight training, it depends on how intense you're going to go. I think almost everyone gets a better workout if they have some kind of fuel. So I wake up really early. I'm not going to sit down and eat like a giant meal before I do my exercise. But I do think that eating something is going to help in many cases, unless I'm doing, like I said, some really light, low intensity cardio. And for each person, it depends. If they feel digestively terrible, we might work on some, essential aminos or something like that. But for intense exercise, I generally am a fan of getting some fuel in there.
I love that you say some fuel because it's hard to strike a balance when you hear things like, get in the at least 30 grams of protein at every meal. And it's like, the last thing I want to do is eat chicken or a ton of eggs before a hard workout.
I don't either.
I can't even stomach it. So just having something like, if we're talking about a handful of nuts or something, protein powder that you like, I think that's really helpful to hear you say that because there, again, so many extremes out there.
Absolutely. We can get that meal after. I totally relate to you on that one.
Real quick, what's your go-to before a workout if you're working out in the morning?
Oh, it totally depends on the season. And I'm not perfect about eating seasonally, but I do crave different things. So it's still hot here in Texas. I still feel like it's summer, even though it's not. I'll do a couple slices of dried mango, and like Emmie just said, a small-ish handful of nuts, and then I do essential aminos. So that sits really easily on my stomach. Otherwise, depending on the workout, I might do like a clean-ish protein bar, something like that. If I'm just doing strength, I'm actually fine, even though you said that sounds gross. I'm fine with like a hard-boiled egg or two. It really just depends.
And portion too.
Yeah.
Having eggs on hand is great. Yeah, having hard-boiled eggs, I totally agree. But having a leftover like chicken breast, I mean, that's what I had.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking about this morning. I didn't do it, but I was looking at it. And I said, I really don't want a cold
No.
chicken breast before I lift weights. I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
And
then I was
honestly,
25.
that's good. I think our body is telling us things a lot of times. If your body's saying you don't want the chicken breast, maybe it didn't want the chicken breast. Mine wouldn't either. So listen to it.
7 a.m., we're talking
Yeah.
about getting all this protein in early in the
Yeah.
morning. We have busy lives. We're getting up early. We're fitting in, I don't even have kids, but that on top of getting in a really good workout session and getting ready for work. And it's a lot.
Yes. Totally hear ya.
We just got to be kind to ourselves. And again, it's tweaking, as you said, even seasonally and daily you may have different needs. So really
Yes.
good reminder.
Yes.
Well, Megan, I feel like I could talk to you all afternoon about all things blood sugar regulation and nutrition. It's totally where I nerd out. But thank you so much for just everything you brought to the podcast today. I feel like you're really broadening our perspective on blood sugar regulation and kind of shining light to all the different factors that go into this. Because I think in the media and online, we just see that, okay, hydration, fat, fiber, protein, and I'm good. And it's really like, it can be stress, it can be sleep, it can be toxins, it can be all these other things. So thank you so much for just your expertise and your time and delivering everything so gracefully and explaining everything so well. If any of our listeners tuning in today do want to connect with you or resonate with your message, where can we find you online?
Everything is at www.thelyonsshare.org. It's LYONS, another S for share.org. You'll find my blog, my podcast, my Instagram, a way to contact me, my email. You'll get everything right there. And I would love to connect with people. Other practitioners always love networking and hearing what they're up to. And I agree with you. This was super fun. Thank you both so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
And for everyone tuning in, we're going to make sure to link Megan's website down below so you can find her online. And until next week, wishing us all vibrant health and wellness.
Thank you so much for being here today. Don't forget to leave us a review and subscribe so we can continue to pay it forward together. And remember, the key to longevity is knowledge. Keep learning, growing, and tuning in to the Vibrant Wellness podcast to discover the latest insights and strategies for optimal health. Join us again next week. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational and informational purposes and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The views expressed by guest and host are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy of Vibrant Wellness. As always, consult your healthcare provider before applying any recommendations that you heard here today.